I'm sitting in my car outside a bank at 8:47 in the morning, and my hands are shaking so bad I can barely hold my phone. Because the voicemail I just listened to, the one from my bank's fraud department, says someone tried to open a second mortgage on my house using my name, my social security number, my signature. And when I pulled the paperwork 20 minutes later, sitting across from a bank manager who wouldn't quite meet my eyes, I saw the forwarding address they'd used for the new mortgage statements. It wasn't some stranger in a call center in another country. It was my ex-girlfriend's apartment, the one I used to have a key to, the one I helped her pick out the paint colors for. 11 months after she told me she needed space to find herself, she had my social, my old pay stubs, a forged power of attorney, and, I'd find out later, 3 credit cards already open in my name. And this is the story of how I found out, how I almost lost everything trying to fix it the quiet way, and how in the end, she's the one who lost everything instead. Stick with me, because what she did wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what I found when I finally opened the storage unit she still had a key to. Hey, welcome back. If you're new here, I tell true stories about betrayal and the very specific, very satisfying moment when karma finally shows up to collect. This one's personal. This is my story, told the way I lived it. Before we get into it, hit subscribe because I promise you this gets so much worse before it gets better. There's a moment halfway through where I found something in that storage unit that changed the entire case from awkward breakup drama into a felony investigation with my name at the top of the file. So stay with me. Let's start from the beginning, back when I actually thought I was the lucky one in this relationship. I met Erica at a mutual friend's birthday dinner 3 years ago. I remember exactly what she was wearing, this green sweater, and she laughed at a joke I made that genuinely wasn't that funny, and I thought, okay, I like her.
She was sharp, quick, the kind of person who remembered your coffee order after hearing it once. She worked in medical billing, which, looking back, should have told me something about how comfortable she was with other people's private information. At the time, it just seemed like a boring, stable job. Normal. We moved fast, but it didn't feel reckless. It felt right. Within 4 months, she'd basically moved into my place on weekends. Within 8, she had a key. I never thought twice about handing it to her. Here's the thing about hindsight. It's brutal. It takes every warm memory you have and turns it into evidence. Like the time, maybe a year in, when she asked to help organize my filing cabinet because she said it stressed her out seeing my bills all messy. I remember feeling grateful. I thought, wow, she really cares about our life together. She alphabetized everything: tax returns, W-2s, my old passport, even the manila folder where I kept my social security card because I never trusted myself to memorize the number. I didn't think about that folder again for 2 years. She also had this habit, I used to joke about it, of asking really specific questions, not in a suspicious way, in a, wow, she's so thoughtful way. What bank did I use? Whether I had a safe deposit box? Whether my parents had passed anything down to me, any property, any accounts? I told myself she was just planning our future, getting serious, being an adult about money the way I never was. There were good years in there too, and I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story where I was miserable the whole time and just too blind to see it. We took a trip to the Smoky Mountains that I still think about. She showed up at my sister's hospital bedside the night my nephew was born, at 2 a.m., with a stuffed animal she'd bought at a gas station because nothing else was open. I loved her. That's not a complicated sentence. I did. But somewhere around year 2.5, small things started sliding sideways. She started handling more of our finances, except it was never really our finances, it was mine, because we never actually merged accounts. She'd just started managing mine, paying a bill here, helping set up autopay there. I gave her access to one account, just one, to cover a shared subscription. That access never got revoked. If you're taking notes, here's red flag number 1. If a partner is managing your money more than you are, and you can't clearly explain why, stop and ask yourself why you agreed to that. She also became weirdly secretive about her own laptop. Password changed twice in 6 months, screen always angled away from me on the couch. I asked once, lightly, everything
Okay. And she said she was just embarrassed about some online shopping she didn't want me to see. I laughed it off. I believed her, because I wanted to. Around month 30, we had the fight that I now recognize as the beginning of the end, except at the time, it felt like nothing. She wanted me to add her to the deed on my house, not the mortgage, just handling payments, but the deed, ownership. I'd bought that house 2 years before I met her, with money from my grandmother's estate. I said I wasn't ready for that maybe once we were married it would make sense. She didn't yell, she didn't even really argue. She just went quiet for 2 days and then acted like it never happened. Looking back, that's the moment I think she stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a set of assets she hadn't fully accessed yet. The breakup itself, when it came, felt almost gentle. She said she needed space, said she felt like she'd lost herself in the relationship, needed to find her own financial independence, her own identity. I remember that phrase specifically, her own identity. And God, if only I'd understood what she actually meant by it. We split things up amicably. She took her stuff, I helped her carry boxes to her car because that's the kind of idiot I was, helping my ex move out while she was already 3 steps ahead of me on a plan I didn't know existed. The last thing she took, without me thinking twice, was a small lockbox of shared documents. She said it was just old photos and ticket stubs, sentimental stuff, and could she please keep it since it was mostly stuff from our trips. I said sure. That lockbox had copies of my social security card, my birth certificate, and a folder of old pay stubs. I didn't think about any of that again until 11 months later, sitting in my car outside a bank, listening to a voicemail that would blow my entire understanding of the last 3 years apart. But what happened next, I never saw coming. So let's go back to that morning, the voicemail, the bank. The fraud department told me someone had submitted paperwork for a home equity line of credit against my house, my actual house, the one with my name on the deed, for $60,000. The application had my social, a copy of what looked like my driver's license, and a notarized power of attorney letter authorizing Erica to act on my behalf in financial matters. I have never signed a power of attorney letter in my life. The bank rep was kind but very clear. Because the request had come with what looked like legitimate ID and notarization, it had almost gone through. It got flagged only because the forwarding address for statements didn't match my mailing address on file, and a junior underwriter thought that was odd enough to double-check. One junior underwriter's gut feeling. That's how close this came to working. I remember sitting in that little glass-walled meeting room just staring at the paperwork. My name, my social, a signature that was almost my signature, close enough to fool a human eye at a glance, wrong enough that I knew instantly it wasn't mine. "Do you know an Erica?" the bank manager asked me, and I just said, real quiet, "Yeah, that's my ex." I want you to understand what the next 48 hours felt like, because it wasn't just anger. It was this specific sick feeling of your whole past rearranging itself in your head in real time. I called my credit card companies that same afternoon to check my accounts. 2 cards I didn't recognize showed up on my credit report. Opened 4 and 6 months after the breakup, both with a different mailing address. Combined limit, almost $14,000. Combined balance, maxed out on both. One had been used for a spa retreat charge, one had a payment to a car dealership, a down payment it looked like on a vehicle that wasn't mine and that I never saw parked anywhere near my house. I sat on my kitchen floor with my laptop that night, pulling every account statement I could find, and I remember actually laughing, this awful, hollow laugh, because I thought she used my identity to lease herself a nicer life while I was still paying off the debt for the us that apparently never really existed for her the way it did for me. I called her, straight to voicemail. I texted her. Nothing. 3 days later, she finally texted back one line. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe someone stole your identity. That happens to people. Don't come at me. That line, that happens to people, is the moment I stopped being confused and started being furious. Because up until then, some small, hopeful, humiliating part of me had wanted there to be an explanation, a mix-up. Identity theft is common. Maybe some stranger got my information some other way, and it was just an awful coincidence that it happened to route back near her. But nobody who's actually innocent responds to, someone opened a home equity loan and 2 credit cards in my name with a shrug, and that happens to people. That's when I went back mentally through everything. The filing cabinet she organized, the folder with my social security card gone quietly at some point without me noticing, the lockbox of sentimental documents she took when we broke up that I never once thought to ask to look inside before I handed it over, the months of her managing our bills, the password-protected laptop, the push to get onto my house deed. It wasn't one betrayal. It was a slow, patient 3-year harvest. I want to be really honest with you here. The hardest part wasn't the money. The 2 cards, even the almost approved home equity loan, awful, terrifying, but fixable in theory. The hardest part was realizing that a person I loved, who sat next to me at my nephew's birth, who I planned a future with, had been quietly building a financial escape hatch out of my life for years, and the love had been, at minimum, partly a means to an end. I didn't sleep much that week. I kept running the math in my head. How much debt was in my name that I didn't create? How long it might take to fix? Whether my mortgage would even survive an underwriting review if this got messier. I felt like the ground had been quietly pulled out from under me for 3 years, and I only just now noticed I was falling. So I did the thing that felt most natural in the moment. I wanted to drive to her apartment, bang on the door, scream at her until she admitted it. I actually got in my car. I got 2 blocks before I pulled over and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel because some small, cold, rational part of my brain said, if you go over there and lose it, you become the unstable ex with a public meltdown, and she becomes the reasonable one filing a restraining order. She will have turned this around on you before you even get your first sentence out. That was the moment, sitting on the side of the road 2 blocks from her building, engine still running, that I decided I wasn't going to react. I was going to build a case. Because here's the thing about people who do something like this. They count on you being too devastated, too embarrassed, or too impulsive to actually fight back the smart way. They count on your love for them lingering just long enough to slow you down. She had no idea I was about to spend the next month turning myself into the most organized, most patient, most dangerous version of myself she had ever seen. But what happened next, she never saw coming either. Revenge stories usually skip the boring part. I'm not going to, because the boring part is what actually won this. The first thing I did the very next morning was call an identity theft resolution attorney, not a regular divorce or breakup lawyer, a specific fraud and identity theft attorney, because I quickly learned this needed a very particular kind of expertise. Her name was Denise, and on our first call, she said something that reframed the entire situation for me. She said, "You're not in a breakup dispute anymore. The second she used your identity to apply for credit without your consent, this became a criminal matter completely separate from your relationship. Stop thinking like an ex, start thinking like a victim building a fraud case." That sentence took a weight off me I didn't know I was carrying, because up until then, some guilty part of me kept feeling like this was our messy breakup, like I somehow needed to handle it delicately because we used to love each other. Denise made it very clear. There is no delicate handling required for identity theft. There's documentation, there's law enforcement, there's a paper trail, and there's patience. So here's what the plan became, step by step. Step 1, freeze everything, immediately. I placed a full credit freeze with all 3 bureaus that same day. I also set up fraud alerts, which meant any new credit application in my name would require extra verification going forward. This closed the door on her opening anything else. Step 2, pull every single record. I requested my full credit report history going back 4 years, every hard inquiry, every account, every address change. This is where I found not 2, but 3 fraudulent cards. The third one had actually already been closed out months earlier, paid down to 0 and closed, which told Denise something important. This wasn't a one-time impulsive mistake. This was a pattern. Open, use, sometimes pay down to avoid suspicion, repeat. I remember sitting with Denise looking at that third card's payment history and just going quiet, because the sophistication of it, the fact that she'd been careful enough to occasionally make payments just to keep it under the radar, meant this wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a system built around loving me. Step 3, the notarized power of attorney letter. This was, according to Denise, the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case, because it was blatantly forged, and it was the exact document that had almost let a $60,000 loan go through. We got a certified copy from the bank. Denise had a forensic document examiner compare the signature to verified samples of my actual signature. The report came back unambiguous, not a match, consistent with forgery.
We also discovered the notary listed on the document was real, a real notary public with a real license number. Denise had me file a formal complaint with the State Notary Licensing Board, because either that notary had been complicit or, and this turned out to be the truth, their notary stamp and blank forms had been used without their knowledge, meaning Erica likely had access to that notary's office at some point. That detail mattered more than I understood at the time. Step 4, the police report. This is the part a lot of people skip out of embarrassment or because they think police won't take financial crimes seriously. Don't skip it. Denise walked me through filing a detailed police report with our local financial crimes unit, with every document organized, dated, and cross-referenced. A messy report gets shelved, an organized one gets a detective assigned. And it did get a detective assigned, Detective Reyes, Financial Crimes Division, who told me on our first meeting that cases like mine, unfortunately, were common, an ex-partner using leftover access and old documents. What was less common, he said, was a victim who showed up with a binder this organized. He said it made his job embarrassingly easy, and I remember feeling for the first time in weeks like I had some power back. Step 5, quietly, carefully gather more. Here's where allies came in. I reached out to a mutual friend of ours, someone who'd stayed close to both of us, not to gossip, but because I needed to know one specific thing. Did Erica still have a storage unit from when we lived together? Our friend, without knowing why I was asking, mentioned that yes, Erica still kept a small storage unit across town, one she'd had even before we dated, and that she'd mentioned once needing to grab paperwork from it a few months back. I want to pause here because this is where the story almost went very wrong. My gut instinct when I heard about that storage unit was to go check it myself. I still technically had a spare key on an old keyring. She'd given me emergency access years earlier, just in case, back when we were happy and trusting. For about a day, I genuinely considered using it. Denise stopped me cold. She told me very directly that if I went into that unit myself without legal authority, anything I found could be thrown out as illegally obtained evidence. And worse, I could actually be the one facing charges for unlawful entry or tampering, even with an old key, even with good intentions. She said the exact words, "Don't let your anger hand her a defense." That was the near miss of this whole plan. If I'd gone in on my own, angry at midnight, thinking I was being clever, I would have handed Erica an escape route and possibly criminal exposure of my own. Instead, Denise helped Detective Reyes build enough probable cause from the documented fraud to get a proper search warrant for that storage unit. I didn't go anywhere near it. I let the system I'd spent a month building actually do its job.
3 weeks after that first bank voicemail, Detective Reyes called me. He said, "You're gonna want to sit down for this one." The warrant had turned up more than credit card statements. Inside that storage unit, they found a folder, an entire folder, labeled with initials that weren't mine, belonging to a different ex-boyfriend of hers, along with copies of his ID, old pay stubs, and what looked like the beginnings of a similar application in his name. I wasn't her only project. I was one of at least 2. That's when this stopped being a breakup story in my head, once and for all. That's when it became something much bigger and much more satisfying to finally see through to the end. But what happened next, when all of this finally caught up with her, I never expected it to unfold exactly the way it did. Once Detective Reyes confirmed there was a second victim, everything moved faster than I expected. He tracked down the other ex, a guy named Marcus, who I'd honestly never met. Turned out he'd noticed strange credit activity about 8 months after they dated. Smaller amounts, nothing that triggered a big investigation on its own, but combined with my case, it painted an unmistakable pattern. 2 separate men, 2 separate relationships, the same playbook each time. Get close, get access, get documents for safekeeping, wait months after the breakup so it looked disconnected, then quietly open credit in their names. Denise filed my formal identity theft affidavits with all 3 credit bureaus and both banks, backed by the forensic handwriting report and the police report. This matters if this ever happens to you. Those fraudulent accounts and that near-approved loan got legally wiped from my record as fraudulent, not mine, meaning I wasn't on the hook for a cent of it. That process alone took weeks of paperwork, but it worked exactly the way it's supposed to. Meanwhile, Detective Reyes and the DA's office built a criminal case: identity theft, forgery of a legal document, and attempted fraud in connection with the home equity application, plus a second set of charges tied to Marcus's case once he came forward with his own bank records. Here's a moment I want to give you because I think you'll enjoy it as much as I did. About 6 weeks into the investigation, I got a call, not from the detective, but from the notary public whose stamp had been used on that forged power of attorney. She'd been contacted by the state licensing board investigating my complaint, and it turned out she recognized Erica immediately. Erica had briefly worked, years earlier, as a temp receptionist at that very notary's office, and had apparently kept a set of blank notarized forms and the stamp imprint from that job. The notary was horrified, cooperative, and gave a full statement. That closed the last gap in the case. Proof not of a random forgery, but of Erica deliberately exploiting a job she'd had years before we even met, meaning this behavior predated our entire relationship. When Denise told me that detail, I actually pumped my fist in the air, sitting alone in my kitchen. Because up until then, some tiny part of me still wondered if I'd somehow pushed her to this, if our relationship had made her do it. That phone call erased that guilt completely. This wasn't about me. This was who she already was, long before we met. Erica was arrested on a Tuesday morning.
Detective Reyes gave me the courtesy of a heads-up call an hour beforehand, which I will never forget, because he said, "You did the hard part. We're just closing the loop." Now, here's the twist I promised you. I expected her to lawyer up and fight everything, deny it all the way to trial. Instead, once Marcus's case and the notary's statement were laid out for her defense attorney, along with the forensic signature analysis, her lawyer pushed hard for a plea deal, because going to trial on two separate identity theft victims with a documented pattern going back to before I even met her was a losing hand. She pled guilty to identity theft and forgery charges tied to my case and a related charge tied to Marcus's. As part of sentencing, she was ordered to pay full restitution for every fraudulent charge, every dollar of debt run up in both our names. Restitution that, thanks to the paper trail Denise and Detective Reyes built, was calculated down to the cent. She received a suspended jail sentence contingent on probation, mandatory financial monitoring for several years, and, this is the part that got me, a formal restraining order barring her from any contact with me or Marcus. I sat in that courtroom, and when the judge read the restitution amount out loud, enough to cover every fraudulent charge on both my cards, plus my attorney's fees for the affidavit process, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, like the scales had actually, finally, tipped back level. But the real unexpected twist came about 2 months after sentencing. Erica had been working this whole time at a mid-sized regional healthcare billing company. Remember, medical billing, comfortable with sensitive personal data, that was always her professional world. Once her guilty plea became a matter of public record, and once a routine background recheck flagged it, which in healthcare billing, handling patients' financial and medical information, is a standard compliance requirement, her employer terminated her within the week.
Not because I told anyone. Not because I called her workplace, which, for the record, Denise had explicitly advised me never to do, since that could look like harassment and undermine everything we'd built. I never contacted her employer. I never posted anything publicly about her name. I didn't need to. The consequences she built for herself, using her own skills, in the exact industry she'd been using those skills to exploit, that's what caught up with her. She lost her job in the field she'd spent her whole career in over the same pattern of behavior she thought she'd never get caught for. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I never once had to raise my voice at her, confront her in public, humiliate her online, or do a single thing that could come back on me legally or morally. Every consequence she faced came from documented facts, a legitimate investigation, and the plain truth catching up to her in a courtroom. That, to me, is the most satisfying kind of revenge there is. Not the kind you have to hide, the kind you can talk about in a courtroom, in a police report, in a credit bureau filing, and still sleep just fine at night. It's been about a year now since that voicemail in the bank parking lot. My credit is fully restored. Every fraudulent account is gone, wiped clean, marked as identity theft rather than mine. I still keep a credit freeze on year-round, out of habit more than fear at this point. And every few months, a restitution payment still shows up, quiet and small, a reminder that the system actually worked the way it's supposed to. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from this, it's this. Love should never require you to hand someone unsupervised access to your entire financial identity. Not your social security card in a shared folder, not sole management of your bank accounts, not a lockbox of sentimental documents you never look inside before handing it over. Trust is not the same thing as blind access, and the two people who taught me that lesson the hardest way possible were named Erica and, honestly, my younger self. I also learned that anger, the hot, immediate kind, feels powerful in the moment, but it's actually the weakest tool you have. The 2 blocks I drove before pulling my car over, that pause, that's what won this whole thing. Not a confrontation, a binder, a lawyer, a detective. Patience. If this ever happens to you, and I hope to God it doesn't,
freeze your credit immediately. Document everything and find an attorney who specializes specifically in identity theft, not just a general lawyer. Let the professionals build the case. Don't hand your ex a defense by doing something reckless out of anger, even if it feels justified in the moment. I want to hear from you now. If you found out your ex had been quietly stealing your identity for months, what would you have done in my position? Would you have gone straight to the storage unit that night the way I almost did? Or would you have played it the slow, patient way? Comment below and let me know. I read every single one. And if you made it this far with me through all 60-some minutes of this, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because there are more stories like this one coming, and honestly, some of the ones still ahead make this one look tame. Thanks for sitting with me through this. Take care of your paperwork, take care of your people, and I'll see you in the next one.